Summer of Sam is a 1999 American crime thriller film about the 1977 David Berkowitz, aka Son of Sam, serial murders and their effect on a group of fictional residents of an Italian-American neighborhood in the Bronx in the late 70s. The killer, David Berkowitz, his murders, and the investigations are shown in the film, but the focus is on two young men from the neighborhood, Vinny, John Leguizamo, whose marriage is faltering due to his cheating, and Richie, played by Adrien Brody, Vinny's childhood friend who has embraced punk music and fashion. This film, which also stars Mira Sorvino, Jennifer Esposito, and Anthony LaBaglia, features a script written by Victor Colicchio, Michael Imperioli of The Sopranos fame, and a bit role in this film, and a third writer who also doubled as the director, one Spike Lee, in a film that does feature music by one Terrence Blanchard, a frequent collaborator with Spike Lee. Vincent, what say you of this Spike Lee joint, Summer of Sam?
Well, as we've been doing all month, we actually have two questions to answer with this film. Our usual question, do we recommend this film? How do we feel about this film critically? And then our question during Black History Month, would this be a Black film?
Right.
I think the first question, you know, I'm very fond of this period of Spike Lee filmmaking. So this is the period of He Got Game. I think Bamboozled is the film he makes after this. You know, I lump Get on the Bus, 25th Hour. Like, this is a fully mature Spike Lee as a filmmaker. And I think as a filmmaker, you see some of the filmmaking prowess of Spike Lee at this moment. I think, as you said, this is a film that in a lot of ways is on an ensemble, but it centers on these two characters, Vinny and Richie, in the midst of this summer of when the son of Sam is murdering people. But as you said in the description, while that's the kind of sexy backdrop, there's a lot going on. Like this is a real time of instability. You know, besides what we talk about with the son of Sam, the Yankees are pursuing the pennant, the World Series pennant. There's a blackout that is on the horizon because this is infamously a record-breaking heat wave that you know causes a blackout at some point. And then just culturally, 1977 is this hotbed of change and things going on. Like, we're talking about Richie, played by Adrien Brody, who is basically you know a punk. Like he's really becoming immersed in punk rock culture, which historically is true in the 70s in New York at this moment. But at the same time, what we call disco is a cultural phenomenon. You know, historically, if this is set in the summer, kind of the culmination of disco as a pop culture phenomenon happens a few months after the summer, because Saturday Night Fever comes out in, I believe, December of 1977. So while the dance scenes in here don't reflect the post Saturday Night Fever phenomenon, certainly this is what was bubbling.
Yeah, and you see it in the fashions.
That you see it in the fashions and everything. And I like Spike Lee's movie. Like, I like the way he captured it. You know, when the film comes on, noted New Yorker Jimmy Breslin kind of introduces it, who not only was a part of the Summer of Sam Son of Sam phenomenon, David Berkowitz infamously sent letters to Jimmy Breslin, who was a columnist and journalist. But, you know, he really is kind of a old school New Yorker.
Definitely.
And I think Spike Lee situates this film as a New York film. Like, this is a New York film. And in 1999, we are, you know, I don't think New York is 100% gentrified in 1999,
No.
but it is certainly well on its way. Like New York in 1999 is not New York in 1991.
No.
And even by 1999, you had New Yorkers, native New Yorkers, sort of talking about how it has changed and what it used to look like. And I think Spike Lee captures this sense of place, this, whether we're talking about this Bronx neighborhood, even the moments that you see in where David Berkowitz is living. And then when they venture out of the Bronx and go downtown where, you know, where CBCG is and everything. And you get this New York. A couple of the moves that you get from this moment Spike Lee you see in here, like the oversaturation to show kind of David Berkowitz's mindset, and you know, there's a bit of the crane that we talk about with Spike Lee, but not as stylized as you would see in earlier Spike Lee. I think there is a strategic move that Spike Lee makes with this film that we've talked about before, where we've talked about Spike Lee in his blind spots. And, you know, something like Get on the Bus, where we said that, you know, Spike Lee kind of has a blind spot for women characters. So it's just no women in Get on the Bus.
Right.
And likewise, we've talked about Spike Lee perhaps not being as strong of a script writer as he is filmmaker. So you look at something again like Get on the Bus, where he doesn't write the script. And as you said, he's the third writer on this script. But since then, I've seen things that Michael Imperioli has written, and I very strongly suspect that Spike Lee's name on this script, he really was the third writer. Like, I don't know how much he actually had to do with this script. And I say that as a compliment to the script. Like, I like the characters in here a bit. The acting, I like a lot of the actors in this movie. I love Adrien Brody.
I do too.
Like, I love Adrien Brody, and I enjoyed Adrien Brody's performance in this film as somebody who is, again, this kind of proto-punk, kind of figuring out how to be a punk, but also this kind of hustler. He's making money by performing in a gay bar downtown, and and he's doing a bit of sex work. And Adrien Brody just has these wonderful soulful eyes that you see everything kind of going on with it. John Leguizamo, I like John Leguizamo, but I have to say, I always get a bit of comedic energy from John Leguizamo that kind of ran up against the overall tone of this film.
Because he's not necessarily on a comic vibe.
Because it's not a comic vibe at all. Although I must say, towards the end where he begins to unravel, and there's this mania because he starts to abuse drugs and he's losing complete control of his personal life. I liked his energy. Like, I like that manic energy that you get the last half hour or so.
Okay.
I really like Mira Sorvino.
Okay. Yeah.
And I really like Mira Sorvino in this as a sort of put upon wife who can't figure out what is the deal with her husband, played by John Leguizamo, who's been cheating on her and everything. And I like, she as much as I like Adrien Brody in this film, I think Mira Sorvino may have been my favorite performance in here. Likewise, I've always liked Jennifer Esposito.
Me too.
Always liked Jennifer Esposito. She doesn't get quite as much to do in this film, but it's someone who the bulk of her screen time is opposite Adrien Brody, I think she does well. Like, I think she kind of carries it. And, you know, the script, part of the reason I know Spike Lee only had but so much to do with this script is because for as much as, and you know, we can talk about this, you know, some critics, you know, I think critics have always been very sensitive about the way Spike Lee depicts Italian Americans, because, you know, some real New York stuff with Black people and Italian Americans in New York. I found the depiction of this community surprisingly nuanced. Like, you know, you got some meatheads.
Yep.
You know, it's always the sort of Italian meathead course that you have, frankly, in a Spike Lee movie, and not just a Spike Lee movie. Like you know, I think, you know, I think I mentioned it a month ago. I've kind of been halfway working through The Sopranos, and I don't think the meatheads in here are any worse than the first season of The Sopranos. But there is a
lot of the same actors.
But Ben Gazzaro plays basically the local mob boss.
Yeah.
Everything.
I see the thing. I can't turn this. It's annoying.
And I really liked him. Like, I really liked this sort of low-level neighborhood organized crime guy. Like there's this great scene with him and Al Pagonia, who plays a detective from the neighborhood.
Anthony LaPadula,
who plays a detective from the neighborhood, who comes with his partner, one of the very few Black actors in this film, Roger Gouverneur Smith.
You know, Spike Lee utility man.
But they have this wonderful scene where they're talking about Anthony LaPadula becoming a policeman and going into law enforcement. And Ben Gazzaro, Luigi, has this wonderful little monologue about him going into law enforcement, and it's basically a low-level betrayal. When, you know, I wanted you to come into business with me, and as you know, I'm just a simple plumber, but you also could have been a great plumber. And you like kind of the hurt that he didn't go and become a plumber. And then during the blackout, infamously, this is a moment where there is looting.
Yes.
In rioting throughout New York.
Particularly in Brooklyn.
And Harlem, downtown. And this was the best sort of depiction of this stereotype of the sort of Italian Americans going to protect a neighborhood. Like, he tells them, send the guys out, give them some bats. And he says, but string up some lights. And, we're going to give out, cannoli and this. And I'm like, this is something, and even the Italian meatheads, again, it's like Italian meatheads from Central Casting. But there's this wonderful little detail where there's a character named Bobby.
Yeah.
Who is an out gay man. Very overtly feminine, very out. And some guys from outside the neighborhood beat him up.
And that's the point. They're outside the neighborhood.
They're outside the neighborhood. So we're neighborhood guys. We're homophobic. We've used homophobic language throughout the film. But Bobby is part of the neighborhood. So therefore, these other guys are going to catch holy hell. So that even that, I was like, now. The other thing you get with later Spike Lee, and we, I say this all the time about these sort of really well celebrated directors. No one is really in the business of telling them no.
Right.
The film is, it's like 2 hours and 50
plus.
2 hours, 20 minutes. And look, it's too long. It's too long. But again, I'm going to say that pretty much about 99% of the movies that we watch that are over 2 hours. And certainly once you get one of these great directors later in his career, I'm going to say there's a bit of indulgence.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, oftentimes with these films, I see places where you can kind of
You see the cut.
You see the cut. But I think the challenge with something like The Summer of Sam, going back to what I said in the beginning, this is an utterly fascinating moment in history, where the film does a great job showing the paranoia that kind of takes over. I think the way it parallels this rise of punk with this sort of neighborhood disco and how they kind of clash with one another. There's a scene where at one point Vinny and his wife, they leave the neighborhood and end up at Studio 54. And this is the real disco. This is the real club life. And frankly, they end up in a drug-fueled orgy.
Right, because they don't
get into Studio 54, but then some Studio 54 people come out and kind of gather and scoop them in, and you realize they are completely out of their depth.
Right. They show up with Plato's Resort, right?
Right. And they go and end up in a situation that y'all are the big fish in this little disco in the neighborhood. But you in downtown Manhattan in 1977 now, and it is a whole different situation. And certainly there's some scenes probably you could probably cut and this, but I couldn't put my finger on a scene and say this complete scene could be gone. Which kind of goes into my argument about whether or not it's a black film. Because frankly, I haven't seen this film in probably 10 years. Like, this is not one of my go-to later Spike Lee films. And it certainly isn't my quote-unquote white film. Like, I always go to 25th Hour.
Okay. Just to correct one thing that you mentioned earlier, he actually did this film after he got game.
After he got, okay, yeah, but it's in this, right, in this moment. Because this is clearly a Spike Lee film. And I feel like if Spike Lee made the film, it's a black film. And certainly if he, it's not like a case of where John Singleton directed one of the Fast and Furious films. Right. But there was nothing about the film that, like, if you had never told me John Singleton directed this film, I never would have known John Singleton directed this film. Like, between Terrence Blanchard and the camera stuff, like, if you had showed this to me, I'd have said, wow, this feels like a Spike Lee film. Right. And then, Roger Gouverneur Smith shows up. But I really was interested in this kind of counter narrative that Lee does with this film. That you see him, whether we're talking about Miracle at St. Anna, where he does World War II, or even The Five Bloods, where he reclaims Vietnam, where I really saw this as this counter narrative to something like Saturday Night Fever, where Saturday Night Fever kind of set up this real, frankly, whitewashed version of club culture and of disco, which then turned it into the fad that it did, which then kind of destroyed the club culture. The irony, of course, is that if you ever watched Saturday Night Fever, it's actually this kind of...
It's a very dark film.
It's a very dark kind of character study, but I think what people pulled away from it was...
The flash, the
flash and the disco
fashion.
dancing, which turned to this thing. But so much of The Summer of Sam kind of parallel, like I see it again as this sort of text that he wants to set beside the Saturday Night Fever phenomenon. Like, this is what's really good. This is what really happened. And again, I say this because again and again throughout the film, he sort of visually alludes to Saturday Night Fever, whether it's the clothes that Vinny wears, whether it's the way kind of Vinny moves, whether it's it's the fact that you have actual club music. Like, I love the soundtrack of this film. Like, you have the actual kind of club music that gets played until it's time for something outside of the club, and then you get ABBA. Like, I love how ABBA is used in this film to let you know that now this is a moment of artifice as opposed to the club itself. So that I was going to land on it's a black film even before I watched it. And then after I finished it, I was like, oh yeah, this is absolutely Spike Lee kind of bringing his counter narrative to it, which makes it even more strongly a black film. So that I land on, I like the film. And I think it's a black film.
All right. I don't think it's a black film. I don't like the film. Here is why. I do agree with you that Spike Lee is trying to bring the counter narrative. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. What I agree with you is that Spike Lee is trying to take all these disparate points, the Son of Sam killings, the heat wave that is taking over the summer in New York, the New York Yankees rallying, the paranoia that is growing in New York in general, but by focus of this movie in this neighborhood. And he's trying to use all of this and put this in this pot as this bubbling, mood of anxiety and fearfulness that is, and desperation that is growing in everyone in the film, all of the characters. John Leguizamo's character, Vinny, because, in his philandering on his wife, he runs kind of tangentially across the Son of Sam, being in the area of one of the murders, and now thinking that the Son of Sam saw him and that he's marked for death soon. The Richie, kind of like a bit of a poser as far as this whole punk movement aesthetic that he has taken on, but in trying to take it on, you see a guy who's trying to kind of like find himself at this cross point of where they're moving out of being just a young teenage knuckleheads on the neighborhood and moving into like they're young adults. And what does that mean? So, how do you want to show up in this world as a young adult? So I think Adrien Brody, to your point, such a soulful actor because of his eyes and just because of his talent, is a very interesting person to put in this role to show someone trying to really find his way, trying to really confront himself sexually, because you say that, he's a hustler. He's out there doing basically almost like turning tricks after stripping.
Yeah, I don't know how almost it is.
Well, only because you don't see what's happening behind the door. So, right. But he's doing something. Yeah, you know that he's doing some kind of sexual work, like you said. But he has this real, honest, affectionate relationship with Jennifer Esposito's character, who the film takes no shorts with it, is kind of like the girl that quote unquote got around
right
in the neighborhood. Like right. All the guys know the Jennifer Esposito character, yet he has developed an actual true relationship with her that, there's interest there. You want to know what's happening. You talk about Jennifer Esposito, an actress who I feel in her prime, this is definitely her prime, didn't get the moment to shine as much as her talent deserves. Curiously enough, the role that Mira Sorvino plays was written for Jennifer Esposito.
Yeah.
But then they decided to cast her in this, and I think she probably does like get the character that she plays a little over more. The shame of the movie, you mentioned about how there's not enough of her. And when she is, she's kind of like she's almost always with Adrien Brody. The real shame is that's the story, at least I want to follow, because I'm curious into that backstory. How are they relating to one another? How are they getting along? They both seemingly seem unaffected by the paranoia that's going on around them, because they seem to be almost in a bubble. The punk world, the emergence of punk culture in New York at this time. It's not even emergence, because CBGB is definitely a thriving thing at this time. But that's kind of like almost cocooned them from what is going on around them, so much so that they don't know that there are forces coming to them that will bear at the end of the film. That is like this missed opportunity. But in Spike Lee trying to put all these desperate parts together, I think the failing is because Spike Lee is the third writer on here, and like there are some earmarks to him in some of the dialogue, but a lot of this plotting is by the main writers, Victor Colicchio and Michael Imperioli. And in them, I see two guys that are trying to get their Martin Scorsese on, and in so doing, this film fails at that, because there's so much going on that I lose track a little bit of the connective tissue. I don't necessarily. They're telling me that there's paranoia in the neighborhood, and there seems to be paranoia going on in the neighborhood because the script says that these characters have to give voice to it, but I don't feel the paranoia. It's not getting across to me, and part of that is because the film takes so many divergences. We talk about the Richie character, Adrien Brody's character, being like a sex worker. Sex seems to be on a lot of people's mind in this movie, because there is a lot of sex and gratuitous nudity that is going on in this film. You talk about things that need to cut. That is what needs to be cut. But the nudity is there, and it doesn't need to be there to the extent that it is. But the sex and that is happening, to me, it doesn't connect to anything. It doesn't. The Son of Sam murders, at least as far as we know, there's not any overt sexual component to it, so it doesn't bubble up in there. There's not any connection between the sex that we see happening and the heat wave. It's got nothing to do with the Yankees and the meatheads that are all around. Yeah, they're homophobic, and they got trash to talk about the Jennifer Esposito character. But outside of that, you don't really. There's no connection to them in any of the sex, and there is a lot of sex in this movie, and I don't know whether or not that is the fault of the writers or it is the fault of Spike Lee, who we have mentioned we have trouble with the way that he writes women. I don't think any of the women in this film are actually that well developed. Mira Sorvino's character,
I like Mira Sorvino.
I like her character, but how much of her is really developed outside of her own? When you think about even the scene where she has with another woman, this film does not pass the Bechdel test because they're talking about Vinny. They're talking about her husband, and she spends the majority of this movie worrying about her relationship about her husband. So there's no real sense of any interiority with her at all. At least the Jennifer Esposito character is trying to rebel against the reputation that she's developed in this neighborhood. But at least from her, and maybe this is me just wanting it for Jennifer Esposito, but I think she's given me the subtext of somebody who recognizes the reputation that she has, but that reputation is from these meatheads.
Right.
She is just somebody that just owns her sexuality.
Right.
She doesn't have any misgivings on what she's done, because when we're introduced to her, she has been seeing a guy for 2 weeks who has proven that, and she's breaking up with him because, like, dude, you're not about nothing. I ain't got time with you.
Well, you know who she is. She's the mirror version of, oh my goodness, I just forgot old girl's name, and I really like that actress in Saturday Night Fever.
Donna Pascal.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is.
Mm-hmm.
She is. So I don't feel like any of the women are even that well developed. God, heaven knows, I love myself some Patti LuPone, who plays Adrien Brody's mother. Even she gets a sex scene in this movie. And I'm like, God, can any woman be cast in this film that doesn't have to have a clause in their contract that says they got to take their top off? I'm like, Jesus Christ, y'all, what the hell are y'all doing? Because
she's the only one that takes her top off in the main cast.
Okay, she's the only one that takes her top off in the No, I believe Jennifer Esposito is shown topless in the scene.
She is.
I think she is. I think she is shown without her shirt in the scene. I could be wrong.
All right.
There are
Patti LuPone does, because that was a little.
You weren't expecting it.
I was not expecting that when I got up this morning.
Patti LuPone, the matron of Broadway, ladies and gentlemen. You are not expecting to see her take off her top.
Well, now I've seen Patti LuPone's nipples. Happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month, and she has nothing to be ashamed of. But it's just not.
You're just not expecting it.
Not expecting it. You're not expecting it.
Yeah.
But she is one of a parade of breasts that are in this film. So forgive me if I believe that every other person. There's a lot in this film. And I just didn't see the connective tissue with them. And okay, if we're not going to spend as much time with Adrien Brody and Jennifer Esposito's character, which I think is the more interesting story, I'm going to spend so much time with this Vinny character and him being so racked with paranoia. Meanwhile, he's the biggest jerk off. And you know who else? That's who else you see. I think you see topless in this. You see BB Newworth, Lilith from.
No, she has a bra on the whole time.
Oh, you're right. All right. Still,
I can't believe
because it's a lot. Anyway, but you spend so much time with Vinny, John Leguizamo, who, again, like you said, an actor for the most part I enjoy. But when I actually started going through my mental Rolodex, I think he's a little bit more miss than hit the times that I have seen him. And he definitely in this movie is a miss. Because I feel his character is all over the place. And because of that, and because he is primarily, to me, supposed to be our window into this world, he is supposed to be the connective tissue to Sam because of Sam supposedly stalking him. And you never get the sense that Sam is stalking him. But I don't feel this paranoia that he's saying he's feeling. I don't really feel it. I don't feel it. And then the depictions of the son of Sam and that whole storyline that is running kind of alongside, almost like a B plot to this movie. Okay, admittedly, maybe they can't go too deep into facts because how many facts are really known about the son of Sam. So he's trying to play with the facts that he knows and like stitch this story to it. But I just don't think that it connects. It just doesn't connect with me at all. And it's stuffed with these actors, Anthony LaPaglia and Robert Gouvernail-Smith as the cops who come into the film. Like, you don't cast these two guys as cops. I think I'm going to follow at least a little bit of them.
Right.
They are gone for most of the film. And then when they do show up, they're kind of like almost in the background. They're not really given anything to do except eat sandwiches at this lunchette with Ben Gazzara. And you talked about that monologue, great little monologue. almost like a moment out of a Martin Scorsese movie. I don't really feel like they follow up with that. I just don't feel. I don't feel the building, the connective tissue, and I feel like these are writers that are trying to be Martin Scorsese, and not for nothing, I think Spike, while ripping out some of his usual bag of tricks with the crane shots and everything like that, I think he's trying to get a little bit of his Martin Scorsese on in here, because that not once but twice and maybe three, if I think about it, times does he try to do the whole, one continuous shot walking into the club. And he does that at least twice going into clubs, which is a Martin Scorsese hallmark. I just found like these were three creatives that were trying to pay homage to, another creative that they enjoyed. Spike, his blueprints are on it hardcore. This is a Spike Lee joint. It says it at the top, and he owns that. God bless him. He should. But I don't think that makes this a black film, because I don't think that this really speaks to the black experience in any way, despite Spike and him finding a role for his sister in this movie as well. And it is a very blinky you miss it role. I just don't think it has anything to say about the black experience or condition circa 1977.
So we're having a version of the Seraph on the Swanee argument, which is the book that Zora Neale Hurston wrote about white people in the swamps of Florida. A black person has to write about something that speaks directly to the black experience, is what you're arguing for it to be black.
No, that's not what I'm arguing. That's not what I'm arguing. I'm just arguing that this film, I don't feel, is a black film. I don't think that okay, my definition of a black film is not necessarily a film that speaks to the black experience, because not all black films speak to a black experience. But I think of case in point, some Will Smith films, some Wesley Snipes films. But I do think that is a hallmark of a lot of black films.
Sure.
And I think black films that maybe fall out of that, criteria are films that feature black actors in either a lead or considerably prominent role. I feel like a director, if it is a black director, does not necessarily make a movie a black film, because they can very much just be a director bringing their own style, their own vision, their own level of craft to a project, but it doesn't mean that they are imprinting it with with blackness in a way that makes it a black film.
Yeah. I think if you acknowledge that this is a Spike Lee movie, and like I said, if you didn't tell me that Spike Lee directed this and just showed me the parts, without Roger Gouverneur Smith or Spike Lee in it, but you just showed me, I would say, oh, this
looks like a Spike Lee
movie. I think
movie.
this is a Spike Lee movie.
Right.
If I can identify your style, then I think it's part of your output. And as a black, like, I think that makes it a black movie. Again, as opposed to, I think it's like Too Fast, Too Furious that John Singleton directs.
Right.
Which that, I'm just sort of a hired gun. I got to make sure the cameras and everything are where they're supposed. Like, I am a professional filmmaker.
Yeah, but that being said,
but there's nothing stylistic. Like I think there are some directors that are auteurs that you see their films and you automatically know This is their style. This is so, whether Tim Burton is doing Planet of the Apes or Dark Shadows or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, this is some Tim Burton stuff, or Chris Nolan or Wes Anderson or Martin Scorsese, or like, okay, well this is their joint. And I think Spike Lee is one of those directors. And then I think
I agree with that.
These sort of journeyman directors that don't have a quote unquote style,
like Tim Story.
Right. They just, I am a professional director, sort of, proficient, skilled at my craft, but my style isn't necessarily one that you can pull out. And for me, that falls more under what the argument you're making. But if you have a style, and I can pull your style out of it, then yeah, I would say that's absolutely, it is absolutely a black film. Like, because you're like, regardless of, it's not what you're talking about, it's how you talk about it.
Yeah. I still disagree with that because, again, that's his style. That's his, his bag of tricks that he's bringing to this, but he's still telling a different story.
Yes, absolutely. But
so it can be a Spike Lee joint. It's definitely a film in his filmography, but I don't think that it is. I don't think that it is a black film because I think that a black film would still have to have the marriage of the two. Either speaking of the black experience or having a black actors or faces in prominent roles.
Okay. All right. As far as it not holding together,
wait a minute. Case in point. Say as opposed to Fast and Furious, right? Which some might argue features black people in prominent roles.
Sure. That it brings in Ludacris and Tyrese.
Yeah. My argument would be that they're not in the leads, but
and it's sort of aggressively non-racial, like the Fast and Furious. Like we'll talk about them next February because racially they're fascinating. Yeah, but go ahead.
Right. Yeah. But suppose John Singleton. Directed, and for all I know, he may have, but I'm pretty sure he didn't, directed a Lethal Weapon movie.
Right.
With now starring Mel Gibson, but Danny Glover's in the lead, a co-lead in those films. An argument could be made about those movies being a black film. I would say, and you probably would say too, an argument could be made without John Singleton.
I was just about to say that. I actually think that's.
But if John Singleton is directing that movie, or Ernest Dickerson, it makes it like it's definitively, a black movie.
Ernest Dickerson is another one. He
does like action. He's done more than a few action films,
and some of them feel more like Ernest Dickerson movies than not.
Yeah, but they almost all got a little bit of his imprint on them.
And the ones that have his imprint, I think I would call black movies.
And I'm drawing a blank, but he does like one of those sword, movies.
Well, I don't
see films. Or is that the Hughes brothers? I think it was Ernest Dickerson, but go ahead.
The Hughes brothers. When the Hughes brothers do From Hell.
From Hell.
I wouldn't call From Hell a black movie. But you know what?
But it's got their imprint.
I was as it came out my mouth.
That is a Hughes film.
I actually take that back.
That is a Hughes film,
and I think it's a black movie.
So because
yes, I am changing.
Because you thinking that falls under the same argument here.
Yes,
because that's what you're saying.
Yes,
okay.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's 100% what I'm saying. And again, I think a filmmaker's style trumps everything else. And as far as the film not holding good, I do think You know, I have a little bit of a reading that the Vinny character is struggling with his sexuality.
Well, I think. Well,
No, not struggling with being straight. I mean, struggling with being faithful. I mean, struggling with his sexuality.
Okay.
And I do think there is this not developed enough through line that people are kind of dealing with their sexuality and questioning each other's sexuality. And you know,
there could be an argument that there's a through line there, but to your point,
it's not developed.
It's not developed.
It's not developed.
It's not developed.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what they were going for with through all this sex. But it's just like I said, the connective tissue is not there.
And then again, I just said general instability in New York at that moment, because I do think this is a very New York story.
It is.
Like, you talk to New Yorkers who were there at the, like, it, you know, like, even like there's this great moment where one of the meatheads jokes that maybe it could be Reggie Jackson. That almost,
because he's number 44,
right? And that almost gets violent because emotions are so high because of the World Series. Like, everybody's just really volatile.
Yeah, I get it. It's just.
But, you know,
I didn't feel the ratcheting up on it. Like, there was actually points where I was feeling like he's trying to get us to feel everything, you know, charging up to this big conclusion, a la do the right thing.
Yeah, certainly.
But it's just not there. It's not there. It's just not connecting for me.
All right.
Yeah. So, would you recommend that people see the Summer of Sam?
I think I would. You know, I don't know if I said this out loud. I kind of allude. You know, it's a mess. Like, it's a mess. And there's a tighter version of this film. But I like what's on the screen enough to recommend. And again, I like this period of Spike Lee, this sort of late 90s, early aughts period. So I would.
Okay. Well, I would not recommend Summer of Sam, ladies and gentlemen. I like you, I believe it could be tighter. And I just think it's a little bit too gratuitous. I think there's too many missed opportunities in here, and I think there are better places to see Adrien Brody, Mira Sorvino, and Jennifer Esposito ply their craft.
All right.
And Spike Lee, to be fair. So there you go. There's our review of the Summer of Sam, ladies and gentlemen. Let us know what you feel about our review. You can hit us up at micheauxmission@gmail.com. That's MICHEAUX MISSION @gmail.com.